This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
From Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenwald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Mara Donnelly. Mara, it doesn't look like you're in the studio with me.
No, I'm not in the studio with you, but I hope
you must be on location, right?
I am on location. I hope that we are back in the studio when we film soon.
I hope so too. Very, very much hope so. But we have a very special guest with us today, someone who's been with us before, but not in the same capacity. We have a large question in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that is about schools and the upcoming fall term. Will we be back in school or not? And one of the best persons to talk about this in regard to higher education, of course, is Dr. Jamie Martin. Jamie, welcome to the show. You are the newly elected, the newly minted president of APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State Colleges and University Faculty. Congratulations on your election.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. I think maybe the good place to start would, so that our viewers have an opportunity to learn a little bit about you, could you tell us a little bit about your professional background, Jamie?
Sure. All of my degrees are from IUP and actually in criminology and criminal justice. So I started my career as a probation officer, and as I continued my education, ended up as a professor, which was my favorite position so far. I recently served as the chair of our department, so I got to see that part of academia as well. And I was thrilled and honored to have been elected president of APSCUF, but I have huge shoes to fill in following Dr. Ken Mash. But I was his vice president for 6 years, so I got to learn a lot about the state level APSCUF and state politics, but still a pretty daunting task to follow in his great footsteps. He was a remarkable president.
He was, and full disclosure, of course, I have to reveal that I am a member of this union, as serving at Millersfield University. So just so our viewers know that. Maura?
Well, thank you so much for being here. As Charlie said, you were elected in April, so
Yes.
you pretty much stepped right into a firestorm with COVID-19. And, you know, just from a personal perspective, what's it been like to have had to tackle such an enormous issue right off the bat?
And actually I was elected in April, but my term started June 1st. So I'm very new in the position, but quite honestly, facing the pandemic has been challenging. I kept saying I was hoping for a more boring start to my presidency. So I'm not even yet in Harrisburg because it's been difficult for me to be able to get there and even work with realtors. So I'm still in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Of course, when the pandemic hit and students went home for spring break and didn't return, that had an impact on universities and faculty as well. So as we tried to go from face-to-face to remote, so we're now facing what's happening in the upcoming fall. But certainly the pandemic and then all of the social unrest and calls for social justice has made this an interesting transition.
How do you think your professors transitioned? How well do you think they did? It had to have been extremely challenging.
Yeah, it was, again, I'll use the word remarkable, but the fact that, you know, we came back or planned to come back and all of a sudden discovered we couldn't, and they had to pivot immediately in probably about 8 days and move things from face-to-face to online. And it's challenging, but I think it's just a testament to how talented our faculty are, that they figured it out quickly and made it as good of a learning environment for our students across the 14. So again, the testament goes to all of them for being able to do that. And I think for our students also to be able to adjust to that new norm, new reality for them for that last 8 weeks or so.
Well, Jamie, it seems that in my estimation, APSCUF has done a fantastic job of keeping its membership informed about what is happening on the 14 campuses and what we might expect. We also have a chancellor who, I don't know, I want your opinion, but he was faced with a lot of challenges fairly quickly. It seems that he's responded very well, but from your point of view, what has the Chancellor's office in PASHE, the Pennsylvania system, what have they had to do during this pandemic and to prepare for the fall? Wonder if you could give our viewers an idea of how daunting a task it might be.
Sure. I mean, they had to move all of their employees to a remote location as well. So they've been working away from the Dixon Center. And then, as you can imagine, they have different things happening at every university, concerns about students getting them safely home, doing planning for the fall. I think at all 14, we had some students who literally didn't have any place to go. So we had students that were remaining on campus in residence halls and determining how do we make sure that they're safe, and how do we deal with dining options. And also had to deal with the financial realities of returning tuition dollars, returning fees and residence hall options, those kinds of refunds. And so they had to deal with fiscal reality as well, as did the faculty.
So what, I understand that a couple of universities have already announced their plan to return, which is very encouraging. I'm sure their students are doing. Can you tell us a little bit about what we know so far on universities opening up in the fall?
I think at this point, Mara, there are different scenarios at probably each of the 14. And so some have announced that we're going to be back face to face, but those seem to be plans that are in progress. Trying to determine if we bring students back. Some universities thinking we'll bring them back early, finish by Thanksgiving, so that they would go home at Thanksgiving break and not return after that. Some looking at the modified calendar, some thinking about would we break the semester into 2 chunks of 7.5 weeks. I think it's in progress. My concern is bringing thousands of students back and not having a plan in place for cleaning protocols, a plan in place for vulnerable populations, whether it be faculty, staff, or students. So I think that will be the challenge. And I know that there are faculty and university administrators and the Chancellor's office working on that and trying to interpret the guidelines from the CDC and the PDE as we move forward. But there are still lots of questions. Even in my mind, I don't know what the national stockpile is of protective gear, protective masks, and how are we going to make sure that everybody has that kind of equipment as you go into the classrooms, and how do we make sure that there's social distancing in classrooms, and all of those kinds of questions. So I think there are plans that are in progress, but I know that there are some to bring students back to campus.
So there can't possibly be a roadmap on how to do this because it's never happened before. It does look like, I would assume they would help each other out and with ideas and plans. Are there just talks going on and idea sharing happening?
I believe so, and that would probably be occurring at some level at the state system of higher education between the chancellor and the university presidents. But then on each campus there are, again, it varies, but work groups, different planning groups that can include faculty, staff, and administrators. You're trying to work through all of the issues that would exist. So I think there are probably communications across the 14, but we even have circumstances where the level of the virus was much higher in certain areas than others. So, Westchester, Millersville, for example, they're in an area that had more cases. But the thing you have to remember is, even if you're in Indiana County or Edinburgh, you have students coming from all across the Commonwealth. Right. So how do you deal with, making sure that everybody's healthy, everybody's safe? So I think those are going to be the challenges. And certainly we have concerns for faculty who might be in a vulnerable population or live with somebody that is vulnerable to this virus. And how do we protect everybody in that regard?
It's difficult with working on these statistics. For example, for Millersville being located in Lancaster County has a large concentration of retirement homes. And that concentration of the elderly tends to distort the statistics and affects Millersville's return, for example. So many factors to take into account. But Jamie, one of the biggest ones, and we've talked with Ken about this many times, is of course the state budget that's dedicated to higher education. We find that many people believe that we are spending foolishly, or we're spending great amounts of money on education and higher education, when in fact, you can tell us, I guess, that state spending for higher education is at an all-time low. I was wondering if you could address that and the challenges that that poses for us, and what kind of a budget is happening in Harrisburg right now.
We were level funded, so receiving the same amount as we did last year. I think there are also going to be some monies coming through the federal stimulus package, the CARES package, that would help out a little bit. But I've talked often about the fact that, I was an undergraduate at IUP, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago. But at that time, the state legislature was funding about 75% of students' education, with the students funding the other 25% in tuition. And now that has flipped. So we do hear about, getting whatever allocation, but the fact of the matter is we're somewhere between 47th through 50th in the support for higher education. We're one of the most expensive state-owned systems in the entire country. And so that has an impact. My personal experience was that as a professor, I'd have students come into my office saying, I can't afford the books for your class. We have food pantry on campuses because we have students that are food insecure. So when you put all of that together, we're seeing that students are leaving our institutions with a huge amount of student debt. We're also locking out, to some extent, the students for whom this system was created, to provide a high quality education for Pennsylvania students. And so for a lot of low income students around the Commonwealth, they're not having the advantage of that being able to attend one of our universities. And going back to my own experience, if I were, I'm a first generation college student, if I were in the position of some of our students now, I probably wouldn't be able to afford to attend. So we look at the loss for those students and their communities because of how expensive our state universities have become.
Well, Jamie, welcome to the presidency. This is definitely a turbulent time that you are entering this important office at, but we know that you'll do well, and we're looking forward to you coming and giving us updates on the show in the near future.
Thank you so much again.
You're quite welcome. Mara and I will be right back after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Mara and I are joined by Dave Sanko, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of Township Supervisors. Dave, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Are you coming to us from your home office or from your professional office?
I was at my home office until this morning, and I left to come into my professional office for a few other things I got to do today. But I appreciate you guys taking this walk down the road of social distancing on steroids.
That's very well put. I haven't heard it put that well by anyone, Dave. And so talking about unusual things, when we go over to Capitol Hill and we find that we have a 2-phase budget for the state. Could you explain to our viewers what's happening on Capitol Hill in regard to the state budget? I don't recall that we've ever had a 2-part budget like this, Dave.
I agree with you. I don't recall it either. I think what really happened, the COVID-19 has so dramatically affected revenue projections with the shutdown, with the changing of tax filing deadlines from April 15th to July 15th. It meant that all of the revenue numbers weren't going to be known until actually for this Commonwealth, a new fiscal year. So they put together a short-term budget, which is essentially will carry through November 30th, and then there'll be a second budget will do the rest. Now, some people have said it's kind of a 5-month budget, and while it lasts for 5 months, it really is a lion's share of the funding. They've programmed about $26 billion, and there's about $8 billion left for when they come back and do the final part of the budget later this fall.
So tell us, Dave, the big burning question of the day: how are your township supervisors doing?
I think they're doing well. I mean, the good news is for residents, government, their government, the people they count on to deliver public safety and roads and services, did not close, and municipalities were exempt. And fortunately, because they wind up becoming the providers of information and critical services, so they're struggling, like everybody else, struggling to get by. There are some revenue. They too will have revenue challenges with people not working. Earned income tax revenues will be down. Local services tax, a lot of the tax revenues will be delayed. Our municipalities also extended the deadlines for when payments were due. So they've got to tighten their belts, and that's going to be hard for a lot of communities that were running pretty lean to begin with.
So what do you think what were the major or are the major impacts that COVID-19 had on the townships?
Well, I think there is, clearly from a health and safety perspective, making sure that fire and EMS was still functional. I mean, all of a sudden they're not allowed to do fundraisers. That's a large part of how they stay afloat. The good news is there's been less traffic accidents. There were less calls for need for police for stuff for regular criminal stuff. DUIs are down because people are not driving,
drinking at home.
So they're probably drinking at home. That may cause maybe some other issues.
Yeah.
But and I think as it relates to the public meetings and the public access, I mean, the township buildings are still there. People still get to have to be able to contact them. They've largely been closed to the public. They are. You can make appointments. There are drop boxes. There are ways with telephone or video conferencing that it's changed. It's just changed how everybody operates, and we're trying to balance continuing to be accessible to residents without putting anybody at risk, residents or township employees.
So Dave, the state government has approved the spending of the federal government's CARES dollars. I was wondering if you could tell our viewers what CARES dollars are and what impact they might be having or might have.
Sure. So the federal government provided for Pennsylvania about $4.9 billion with a B. $1 billion went direct to the 7 largest counties in Pennsylvania, or largest communities in Pennsylvania: Philadelphia, Allegheny, Buckchester, Delaware, Montgomery, and Lancaster. So they got direct allocations. And then so that left, they gave $3.9 billion to the state to distribute to everybody else. The state has allocated about $2.6 billion of that, $1.3 billion left for later to do this fall. And of that total number, while the 7 counties got $1 billion direct from the federal government, the remaining 60 counties have to share about $600 million. was direct block granted to the county commissioners, and municipalities will have to claw and try to access some of that funding because counties too have expenses, and unfortunately there's never enough money to go around.
So there isn't a single person who hasn't been impacted in some way by COVID-19. If there is, I'd like to meet them, but everybody has had to adopt and adapt in some way and adopt new ways of doing even the most basic of things in our lives. I'm sure your members have had to really step up and meet the needs of the communities. Do you have any stories to tell us about how they may have done that or how they may have helped others?
Sure. There are some wonderful stories out there. And this is one of the reasons that again demonstrates why local government is so connected and so valuable, because it does connect with community residents. We've had instances where local governments have banded together with food banks and tried to collect food for poor and disadvantaged folks. We've had police and fire departments that put together little parades for kids' birthday parties or senior citizens large anniversary events. We've had the creation of new video channels and online web chats. We've also seen some police departments that have just taken to down in Lower Makefield, as an example, they do welfare checks on senior citizens. They just go knock on their doors and make sure they're okay. We've seen other police departments that have made arrangements. Seniors are kind of shut in nursing homes and personal care facilities, and they've made arrangements for either chicken barbecues or pizza deliveries to try and connect and keep them feeling like people care about them. We've had some great stories. One police department used to go and greet kids at school on the way into school and the way out of school each day. And with schools being closed, they can't do that. So they have opted. Those officers are now going on a meeting video channel just like this and reading to kids, reading stories to elementary school kids. So there is just countless numbers of ways that elected officials in the communities have stepped up to kind of band together and make sure everybody knows we're all in this together.
Dave, there are, you would probably be best positioned to comment on of course, the local government's requirements for public meetings goes on. And we're wondering, in this time of social distancing and lockdowns at home, how have the local governments in Pennsylvania been having public meetings and keeping the public safe, Dave?
Well, I think as we've learned through this, necessity is sometimes the mother of invention. So we've learned to do things that we didn't think we knew how to do. And some things are challenging. We have municipalities all across Pennsylvania that are ranging in the ways that they're connecting with their residents from low-tech solutions to high-tech solutions. Some communities are continuing to have their public meeting because they don't get a large turnout, and they could have 10 or 25 people in the meeting rooms, but they have appropriate social distancing. Everybody's 6 feet apart. They have hand washing and all the appropriate sanitizing options. Some communities have taken their public meetings to a local park in a pavilion where it's outdoors and people can spread out a little bit. One community held their township meeting like a drive-in meeting where everybody could turn on their radio and listen to listen, and they could raise their hand or blow their horn if they had a question they wanted to ask. And we've seen that with some church services too. So, those have been kind of the low-tech solutions to then conference calls where the members can actually now, after the passage of the legislature's Act 10, just like the legislature can meet remotely, now municipal governments can meet remotely. So those supervisors can be at home and dial in, be on the call. Residents can dial in and be on the call. There are safety security procedures in place. Those can be just audio calls. Residents can send email questions in advance. They can do questions on the phone to video conferencing like we're doing here. And all of those are options, and all of those have enabled residents, Pennsylvanians, to stay in touch with their local governments, and local governments to stay in touch with their community.
It's so great to have seen that our local leaders have been able to continue, not really business as usual, business as new usual, but I think it's really great. I was reading recently that a group by the name of SafeWise had released the 20th safest cities in Pennsylvania, and half of those are townships. Does that surprise you?
Well, I think more interesting, I mean, yeah, not really, because it's been kind of consistent like that over the last several years. If we look at the top 100 safest cities, if you will, uh, they are virtually all townships or with some boroughs. Cities are largely sometimes have higher crime statistics. As we're going through this, we find that the townships and our townships have more population, more people live in townships than in any other type of government in Pennsylvania. And there's a reason for that, because they're safe and they're affordable. As we've seen this in the recent years, the census shifting has had people moving from the urban areas to the rural areas. I suspect we're probably going to see more of that.
Yes.
Because as we've the last couple of months, whether you think the city is a place, or the high population areas are a place where you can get sick faster, or have higher virus acts or possibility infection, or just general civil unrest. People will be opting to go to have a little more space, to move to rural areas, and I think townships will again prove their mettle as being safe and affordable communities.
Well, Dave, in the last 30 seconds, we find that many organizations are having to make all kinds of adaptations to this COVID-19. And one of the things that's happened is that your organization is having to scratch its annual conference.
Well, again, the use of technology has helped a lot. We've created a virtual classroom so that almost all of the workshops that we would have had at the conference are now available online for members to watch over the summer. So instead of having to choose 5 sessions, they can now watch all 60 sessions if they like. We'll be offering them over through June, July, August, and they'll be recorded into the fall. We've done video town halls on Thursday evenings where we get between 200 and 500 people on the line, and we get to update them with information. A lot of technology opportunities, a new website, new information. We created a daily morning newsletter that helps keep people involved. But one of the things that became very clear is that Pennsylvania, and maybe the silver lining that we hope will come out of this, is that Pennsylvania has a very serious challenge as it relates to broadband and internet access all across the state, but most predominantly in rural areas. But even in the urbanized, populated areas, I think we've seen with telemedicine and kids learning from school, learning from home, even in the cities, there's not enough capacity for the broadband internet activity. So hopefully the Commonwealth will pay attention to that and focus on building out that tools before we have another generation that's left behind.
Okay, Dave, well, we have a place for you in distance education at Millersville University, and we will see you again next week here on Behind the Headlines.